everyone. I am Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Today, you are watching our Women in Money series, and we are thrilled to be hosting a veteran news anchor, media executive. So welcome to Jane Hanson. Jane is a 9-time Emmy award-winning television journalist and media coach. Jane spent most of her broadcast career at NBC New York, reporting on every major event from the tragedy of 9/11 to the joy of Yankees victories, to parades, to Wall Street and Washington. She's hosted Jane's New York that traveled around the world and then later New York Live. She's been honored by the New York Police Detectives, New York Firefighters, and many, many, many other groups, and has served on the board of several charities. Jane, welcome again. Picking back up on the theme of reinvention and staying fresh, relevant, and current, and this is a theme that comes up time and time and time again. And we knew that it was a theme in 2007, 2008, after the market crashed. And for many women over the age of 40, we all had to figure out how to reinvent to really stay on top of our game in our industry. Now is a whole different story. And would love to get your insights from your perspective in the sense of what's happening for professional women right now. And then we'll touch upon what's happening, you think, for women in the media as well.
Well, when you think about reinvention, that's something that I have continued to do throughout my life because, for a couple of reasons. Number one, the world changes and the world is always changing. So I'm not sure that we can ever truly have the same job or the same career. And the second thing is, I think as women, we really are almost forced to do that because, let's face it, I was in the television broadcast business for most of my life, and I began in it when I was 20 years old. And I remember thinking then, what's going to happen when I'm 35? Will I age out? Well, I didn't leave it. And in fact, I still do some broadcasting, but I didn't leave it until a lot later than 35. But I think that if you're not capable of thinking about how to reinvent yourself, you're going to be very sad and you're going to be very frustrated. And there's so many things that each one of us can do that we don't even realize. I work a lot of the women that I work with, because I do all this coaching now, many of them are moms, had big careers, chose to stay at home for a while. In fact, I just talked to a bunch of them yesterday, then went back to work, back to pretty high profile jobs. And they kept apologizing when they got back into those jobs, saying, well, I was at home for 10 years. And I'm like, are you nuts? Think about what you did when you were at home. You were the executive assistant. You ran the PTA, which was, if you need leadership, you need it for a volunteer organization, right? And you did the household budget. So, I don't even think women recognize, I think this is one of our failings. We don't recognize all of our great assets. And if you really sit down and make a list and say, what am I truly good at? When you know that maybe the writing's on the wall, maybe you're not going to stay in that particular job. But if you really sit down and make a list, you can say, wow, I'm good at this. I'm going to try that for a change. And what do I really feel passionate about? Because our passions change so much as we get older. So it's really important to keep thinking about that on a continual basis. And that's what I keep trying to do.
It's so, so, so true. And, we even see that for younger women as well. And so now we know that millennials are almost 40, if not close to 40. And we also see that, for many women, particularly from major financial services institutions, they're opting out of the workforce and they're not coming back. Right. And for the most part, we're seeing trends, even at, very large global financial institutions where companies are having a really hard time retaining talent and inspiring women that they're also being attentive to their needs, so want them to come back. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering in this moment in time, because we know that also happens in the media, it happens in publishing, it happens in every single industry. And in this moment in time, we know that there are so many more unemployed women than ever before. Partly because of the pandemic, but also partly because we know that the data shows that women are overrepresented in unemployment in every vertical. What do you think in this moment in time, now that there's so much opportunity for transformation and so much opportunity for disruption, is now a moment in time to really work with companies to help them think through those ways in which they discriminated against women, people of color, older workers differently now than in the past?
Absolutely. And I think it's really, really simple. You have to look at everybody for what they bring to the table and what are their strengths and how can they fit into your organization, and then give them the opportunity to do that. You talked about women leaving jobs. They're not leaving those jobs because they feel really fulfilled. They're leaving those jobs because they are frustrated and they can't see a way to move forward. I think women have traditionally been underappreciated, and we all know they've been underpaid. And there have been points in my life where I certainly made a lot less money than the men that were sitting right next to me on the anchor desk. So I think that they need to be treated fairly, and they needed to be treated for their authenticity and for what they bring to the party. Men and women are different in the way we look at things. I've done a ton of work with organizations where there'll be a large scale training, let's say, for example, and there will always be maybe out of 60 people, 45 of them or 50 of them will be men and 10 of them will be women. And yet what I notice is that the men rush to solutions and the women ask the questions to figure out what's the right solution. And so we're just different. We think differently. We bring other things to the party, and we all have our own abilities to offer the right services and the right, we have assets, and they're not as recognized. And then we just go, hey, we're out of here. What's really interesting to me are the number of women that I've met who are entrepreneurs now, who have out of this have created some kind of a business and are creating their own ability to use their strengths and do something else. I think that's wonderful.
Do you think this is also a moment in time where women are going to think about the relationship to money differently as well? This is our Women in Money show. And, we know, really, truly, it so resonated with me what you said around, there were times that you knew that you were sitting next to a man who was making much more for the comparable work, right? And that we know that that's still an issue across corporate America. It's a problem in academic circles, in the nonprofit world. But from your perspective and experience, what needs to happen in order for women not just to be recognized for their achievements and for their strengths, but then also for us to be able to feel like we deserve to ask for more? Because that's a big part of the problem as well, right?
Right. Do you know that most women never ask for a raise, which is stunning? Why don't we ask for it? Because we kind of expect that our work is going to be recognized and we'll just get it. Do you think a guy sits around and does that? No, they don't. They go ask. So we do not have the right relationship with money, and we need to change that. And there are tons of statistics that surround all of that. So how do you change that, and how do you fight for what you deserve? I think you have to have very real conversations, but also I know there have been some rules that have been passed. I certainly know there was one in the UK. I don't remember where it stands in the US, where there is supposed to be pay equity. For the same role, women and men are supposed to be paid the same. I also know that would be a great help if people were known in corporations what the money is they're making. Let's know what those are. In the broadcast business, it's a secret. People think, oh, somebody's making this much money, but nobody knows what that contract really reads. So I think if there was some way of knowing, it would be great. I also believe that if we had more women on boards that were sitting at the very top of these large corporations or even smaller corporations that said, there better be equal pay for women. And frankly, until I think women sometimes were their own worst enemies, because we never had that same kind of bonding. Men would go out on the golf course, or they'd go, out for dinner, or they'd do something where we were always back in the office working. And so they bonded in ways that we always thought our hard work was going to get it there. Whereas they knew if we go on the golf course and become really good friends with these guys, they're going to give us the business. So now we're changing that. We're figuring that out, which is really, really good. But I think all those things have to occur for us to really recognize our own worth. But the bottom line is we have to ask.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm also wondering, it's still a youth culture. And we see that in everything from fashion and cosmetics to health and wellness to every industry where women are present. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you think this moment in time will help to shift that a bit? Because as we know, in the next 20 to 30 years, women are going to inherit about $72 trillion. So there's going to be an incredible wealth transfer. And much of that's going to go to women, and particularly Gen Xers and baby boomers. So not necessarily to the generation that we always think is held in high regard from that youth culture perspective, but actually women like us, right? And so, from your experience and your perspective, what do you think could change there?
Well, what I think is that, well, first of all, what's always bugged me is that while they talk about how women don't have control of the money, I want you to look at the households in America. Who buys all the products? Who runs the budget? Women buy more TVs, like large, big TVs, than men do. Women actually, I think, might even buy more cars. So the truth is, particularly women who are over the age of 40. So the truth is, there is this huge spending capacity that women who are of that age group, but we don't get recognized for it. We get ignored and we're invisible because of it, which is really, really stupid. Like, appeal to us and we'll buy your products, but we seem to be ignored and isolated. So what I do see happening is with this big transfer of wealth, you're going to see a lot of shifts. One of the things that I think is really interesting, most of the women that I know who are either in the investment business or who control their own money are really putting a big emphasis on sustainability, environment, and governance. They want to be invested in companies that are really looking at being good citizens, and that they're really going to be watching out for our environment. I mean, look what's happened during COVID. The skies are so much clearer. The oceans. I did an interview with a doctor recently who also flies. That's how he gets a respite from the hospital. And he goes, you can't believe what's happening when you fly out over the ocean off Long Island. You can actually see so far down, and you can see fish and whales and things haven't been able to see before because of how dirty the water was. So the environment is changing quickly. It's we women that are pushing this stuff. And when women have a lot more authority over that money, that's what they're going for. They're not going to buy something because they think, oh, that price is going up. They're buying it because that stock or that business is going to give them what they want, which is a better earth and more responsibility and more compliance and better citizens.
Jane, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the points that you were speaking around social impact investing and ESG. I absolutely agree that I think that there's more corporate transparency during this moment in time, not because companies feel like they have to do it to check it off a box, which was often the complaint of those who were assessing corporate social responsibility programs and initiatives that companies would often create and execute, particularly for helping women and people of color, for example, in the workplace. And the critical part of it is that while it's very, very well intended, sometimes it feels like it's literally just, you're doing something to check it off a box. But now we're talking more in a holistic sort of intersectionality way, in the sense of how all these issues really collide with each other and intersect, particularly in this moment in time, right? And so would love your thoughts just on, what you think of what's happening.
Well, I think, you just used the word colliding. So we have a big collision of things that are going on. And sometimes it's hard to think about being socially impactful when people don't have jobs. And it's hard to think about, how do I look at all this compliance stuff when I'm scared to think about the future because I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we live in an age of such uncertainty, and I think it's going to be that way for quite some time, which means I don't know how it's all going to shake out in the immediate future. What I do know, and what I hear consistently from people I talk to, and I talk to a lot of people on a daily basis from all walks of life, and what I hear them all saying is that they are taking this time, maybe because they're not working or maybe because they're not commuting and they're not traveling, and they're spending a lot of time kind of with themselves that they haven't before. They're really taking time to take a step back and say, what does this all mean? This must be happening for a reason. I'm going to reset myself. And if you do that, then you can think, how do I then logically go forward so I can achieve these goals of really being impactful and really doing what I want from a societal standpoint and really helping in this place where we're all polarized and we're all trying to find our way. I mean, we've been hit with so many things at once. I mean, next thing that's going to come are locusts from Africa or something. I don't know. So I just think people really, really wise people are really compassionate people are really smart people are just taking the time to step back and say, I want to move forward as effectively as I possibly can. What's that going to look like? And I think there are people who are showing maybe more compassion, maybe more thoughtfulness, maybe more when this is over, and as I step back into quote unquote normal life, that normal life ain't going to be what it once was. I don't believe that for a second. I think we're all touched by this. And that's the thing, it's so universal. It's so universal.
It really is. And I think you just hit the nail on the head in the sense of it's something that we've all experienced either directly or indirectly, right? And so many of us have become sick with it. Many of us have recovered. We all know people who have died from it. We also know, the millions of people who have been impacted because they've been furloughed or laid off. Like that all touches very close to home many times as well. And I hear words around, and you mentioned just some of them just now, around compassion and empathy and resiliency and endurance during this time. And I think that, during this moment where we're all taking that step back and having those moments of self-reflection, it's interesting that that's what you're hearing, because that's what we hear Mayshad women talk about a lot too. It's just that really using this time to really think through, like, who am I? What is my relationship into the world? Who do I want to be around, right, going forward? And using this time to, declutter a lot of parts of our lives and really think about, like, so if this is now the world, and you're right, like we're not going back to anything like what we had before. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe this is meant to be a wake-up call. I'm wondering, you picking back up on the theme of communication and endurance and empathy and compassion, how is that impacting now the work that you do with clients, given that so much of our communication is, in this flat screen world?
Well, my work was mostly face-to-face, although I was doing some virtual work before this. And of course, that all hit the stop button, right? Probably on March 13th, 2020. I can give you the date. And I haven't been back in New York City since that date. And everything, shut down for a while and got postponed. And then all this virtual work started coming in. And so there are some skills that people needed to learn in order to be effective virtually. The most important of which is, we're used to that face-to-face thing. We're used to shaking somebody's hand. We're used to maybe patting them on the back, great big smiles. It's hard as hell to smile through a mask. Just all the things that we would do to communicate through our body language. And that's probably the hardest part of it. And so what I see that's really important, if you want to connect with somebody virtually, and this is the thing that every single client has said to me, is how do I make that same connection when I am just doing it through this lens? And so I got some really clear stuff that you have to do. One of which is it surrounds empathy. You have to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And you have to think, what is that person feeling? So my counsel to clients when we begin talking about how to be effective and to create that human connection, even though we're doing it through a lens and through a screen, is about, first of all, finding out how are they? What is their story like? Find out about what's going on in their business, because most of my clients, it's all about they're involved in some sort of business or another, or maybe they're going to be doing some media interviews. But what they need to do is really figure out, how can I connect with that person by finding out and caring about who and what they are, putting myself exactly in their shoes and thinking, carefully about what are the right questions to ask them, doing a little research ahead of time, what's going on in their community, what's going on in their business or their industry, and then talking about their family and really, really giving somebody that feeling of caring. Because the point is, most people think, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care.
Elements of the day-to-day life now seep into how other people see us. Like, I see your home, you see my home, and we're getting a glimpse of other people's personalities in ways that we don't when we're at the office, no matter if we have our roots done or not, no matter what we're wearing on the bottom half of ourselves. I'm wondering too, in this moment in time where there's a lot of hyper attention paid in the media to basically three issues, three rotating issues. Of course, the very well-deserving attention that's being paid to the racial inequalities now in the United States that have surfaced and bubbled to a tipping point, I hope. The upcoming presidential election, and of course, coronavirus. And so with that said, then it leaves a lot of other space for things that we're not hearing about. Mm-hmm. And, what do you think about, kind of that world that we live in now where we're over-consuming so much news, but it's hyper-focused in very specific areas, particularly given the fact that, people are really trying to struggle in so many other ways with just ensuring that they have access to information and also ensuring that they're being heard in spaces where there isn't a lot of empty space for them to be heard and seen and recognized?
I think it's extremely difficult. And I have to tell you that as having been a news junkie my whole life and having been involved in newscasts for, decades, I don't watch the news very often. And the reason I don't is for exactly that reason, because it makes you weary and it makes you depressed. And I would rather listen to music or watch a movie or maybe listen to a podcast or do something that will give me other points of view. Now, I think we all need to be informed so that we can protect ourselves and so that we can be doing the right thing. And I think that's really crucial. But I also think, that there's too much news with a point of view. What I learned in journalism school a long time ago was the truth and nothing but the truth, and respect the audience enough to let them make their own decisions. Give them the facts. And in particular, when I would cover a story where I really, really, really favored one side over the other, I would bend over backwards to make sure that I was being as fair and as objective as possible, because it's not my job to tell the viewer what to think. And so I really feel like we need to trust the audience more and give them the information so that they can make their own decisions. It's just, it can overwhelm you to the point where I really believe that we are going to have, when things settle down, when maybe the COVID threat is so much less, maybe as we get past the election, maybe when we've started actually making some very wise and important changes in, the whole world of Black Lives Matter, when we get back to a place where people feel calmer, I think we're going to have a heck of a lot of PTSD. I think right now we're plodding through. We're not thinking about the future. I really believe we're just going to have a whole lot of people that are going to say, I don't know what to do. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I'm scared. And it's all going to hit us. It's going to hit us like a bombshell. And I really believe we need as much help as we can possibly give to people right now. And I'm not sure that comes from watching news 24/7.
Right. So many questions in response to what you just said, because I think it's brilliant on so many different levels. Number one, from a mental health perspective, I think there's going to be such an incredible need for the mental health profession to really rethink how it provides services, particularly because we know that there are, a lot of people that are not going to see doctors right now because of fear of COVID, mm-hmm. right? So we're not going for everything from routine preventative checkups to, I've even heard of from our friends that are doctors in the Mayshad network, like people that are just foregoing, important life-saving, treatments right now because they're afraid of getting COVID because their immune systems are already compromised. And so I think that, from the mental health world, so much of that is going to have to change to ensure that we are responding in different ways. And, it's interesting, Jane, I had not thought of it as being, I had not thought of the correlation between what we're experiencing now and just being in shock and using the fight or flight experience to really get us through this moment in time. But you're absolutely right. Like what comes next, we're not prepared for that. Mm-mm. And I think our institutions aren't prepared for it. I think that the healthcare profession is not prepared for it because now everyone's just in the hyper focus of what is COVID, what is COVID, what is COVID, right? Because that keeps changing on a daily basis as well.
Right, exactly. So I have a daughter who's 30, and my daughter lived through 9/11 and now this. And she's really anxious. And I think there's a whole generation of kids. She's a millennial. That whole generation of kids has been through so much in their lifetime. And I really believe that they're going to go, they're anxious. They're scared. They don't know what, a lot of them lost their jobs. This whole group of college graduates that never got to finish school, and what the heck are they going to do for work? So I worry about them. I worry about people who are older that know that the threat of COVID is so great for them and that they're going to have the same thing. I just think we're going to have a huge mental health problem if we don't start doing something about it right now. And unfortunately, with all these resources being tied up with COVID, it's very difficult to even think about creating those programs. I've been doing a lot of work with some people that are involved in PTSD, mostly surrounding veterans, but now they're expanding that. And they're really working very hard to try to offer it to more people because they think it's necessary. So,
and it's interesting the correlation between mental health and stress and anxiety now and the news, right? Mm-hmm. And what we hear. And I want to go back to what you said around the biases in news reporting and your perspective of, how you were trained in understanding that if you provide facts to people, if you report the facts and let people make their own decisions, and that's not the world that we live in now. But that happened pre-COVID. And do you think that all things related to digital social media has played a role in that, in the sense of, kind of this mass transformation, mass shift to all things related to, incredible opinion-aided stories that have come out just on so many different topics, right? Pre-COVID, but particularly now because of COVID.
Yeah, I'm troubled by it. I really am, because I just wish that there were a way that we could, I don't know, it's hard to sort through it is the problem. It's really hard to sort through what you're listening to and then what exactly is the truth. Because, the truth is, history, like the greatest adage is history is written by the victors. So I can almost put it like that. So I just want us to have the facts and then to be able to decide, how do I feel about that? And what do I want to do about that? And how do I want to make my life work? And so, I don't know how we just got so so polarized, but it's very polarizing for this country. Mm-hmm. And we are not a place that was meant to be polarizing. I mean, think about what we are. I mean, this place this country was created by, I don't know about your ancestors, but mine came from Minnesota. They came from Norway and Scandinavia, and moved to Minnesota. I don't know why the heck they moved to a place equally as cold as Norway. Couldn't they have gone to Miami? But whatever. And I'm just saying that everybody came here because where they were, they weren't making it. And they came here with all these dreams and hopes and aspirations, and everybody worked together to try to create this wonderful union. And we're so polarized now. And it just is, it's like, who are we? I feel like we've lost our way. And I do blame some of the media for that. I really do, because and then social media, add social media on top of all that, where just everything, it's considered to be truth when it may not be truth at all. We used to call them civilian journalists 10 years ago, which meant somebody who would be in, let's say there was a school shooting, one of those awful situations, and there'd be somebody using their phone and sending pictures and saying what was happening from inside the school. Well, you had no way to verify what was true and wasn't true. And so you just don't know. And I really feel like we got to get back to a place where we can just be honest with each other and tell the truth to each other and trust each other, that our motives are going to be good.
And I so appreciate what you just said around trust, because that's a big part of what I think we've lost. And, we see that in so many different ways, in so many different spaces. And I think as professional women, we're also wanting to be a part of doing something different and being better, right? And going back to the first part of our conversation, where many of us are using this time to really take a step back, to reflect, to become very introspective, and to really think about, like, what is the difference? What is the change that we want to have in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing that there's so much uncertainty. And so we know what we ultimately want the future to look like, right? But who knows if that's going to be aligned with the reality of the situation, right? Yeah. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, in the work that you do, I'm going to switch gears for just a second here and talk about the art of communication and persuasion and empathy, and picking back up on some of those soft skills that are becoming much more prevalent and much more important in how we engage and how we lead and how we inspire. You wrote a piece in February about our presidential candidates and body language. Mm-hmm. Let's discuss that. What did you learn?
Well, I love discussing body language because it is innate. You want to do a little check of yourself? Turn off the sound on the television when you're watching a show. You will still get the plot because of the way that they're moving. And I would say sit down on a bench and watch people walking the street of Manhattan, but we're not going to do that right now. And you make a judgment about everybody by the way they're walking, by the way they're looking, by the way, everything they're doing. And so we've walked on Earth for, depending on who you believe, 2 to 14 million years, but we've only had a spoken language for 160,000. So we communicated through our bodies and no other way for so long, and we still have it. So body language is really significant. We form opinions about people and make judgments before they open their mouth. So you need to think about this carefully. And everything that somebody does, how they use their hands are like a second language. They add emphasis, but they also can make you think somebody's nuts, or different gestures you make with your hands alone will give you a signal. If I'm pointing at you like this, even though I'm just making a point, you're going like, she's scolding me, like that teacher did in second grade. I don't like her. And the way we use our facial expressions, the way everything that we do gives off a signal. So what we do with our bodies has to be in sync with the words that we're saying. So when you watch something like a debate, I mean, you can really take away so much. And when you watch it with an eagle eye, like I do, I can just sit there and go, oh yeah, I know what they're thinking. I mean, if you really think about it, you can see somebody just itching to talk, and you can see somebody that's like jumping out of their skin, and then you'll see somebody who's like very amused and like, oh yeah, right, sure, uh-huh. You can take so much away from just the hidden language of what the body tells you. And that's become really important in this virtual stuff. Because even though it's hard to really pay attention to someone, because you're supposed to keep your eyes right here on this lens right here, you can still see what they're doing. Like you're shaking your head in agreement with me, maybe. Or you're thinking, Yeah, I like what she's saying. I'm showing her that I'm listening. Women do that more than men. We shake our heads like we're listening because we want people, because we're caretakers and nurturers. And we want people to know that we're listening to them. Whereas men don't do that as much. They don't. There's a lot of huge differences.
I want to touch upon something you just said too, particularly around gender communication. And we talked about, themes of empathy and compassion and communication. And those are emotional intelligence skills, right? Those are skills that we bring to the table that necessarily haven't been respected in the workplace, or they haven't been valued, or they're not monetized in the same way that many of the hard skills around just job function and analytics and et cetera are. I'm wondering in this moment in time, do you think going forward, the way in which we communicate, which is much more feminine, stereotypically feminine, will actually also help to transform how we lead, particularly if much of what we do going forward is in the flat world, on the screen?
I do. One of the wonderful things about women is that we listen. And we listen more. And we don't interrupt. We listen not with the notion of, I can't wait until I get to say something. We listen with a thoughtfulness that is about really trying to understand what the other person is saying. And I really believe that listening is the core of beginning to heal. And I truly also believe the other great adage, which is we have one mouth and two ears for a reason. And so the thing is that women have an ability to really show empathy and vulnerability and caring and nurturing, all wonderful skills. They have not been as much appreciated in the business world as they should have. And so, but yet when we try to be aggressive, we're considered to be, bitches. So we walk this fine line, but there is a way where you can still be that listening, nurturing, nice human being who still can be tough, being nice. There's a great book written by a friend of mine named Fran Hauser called The Myth of the Nice Girl. How do you get what you want without being a ITCH? And it's really all about the listening and then treating people with ultimate respect and saying, I've heard what you said, but here's how I feel and think about it. And let's discuss. But you can do things like that in ways that really make sense. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't. And I think actually that may change because we've hit the pause button. I may see that changing because in the past, we're so busy running around and moving and scurrying and commuting and racing to get everything done and being in this world that was just so intense. The intensity has been removed, at least some of it. And that may mean that we may take more time to be considerate and to be respectful and to really listen. So I would love to see that happening. I think women's skills, honestly, I believe if women ran the world, there would be no wars.
Well, we look at, those countries where women lead now, and their, ability to contain coronavirus is a very different picture than what we have in other countries where men lead. So I think you may be onto something there.
I mean, look at that woman in New Zealand. I just think she's great.
And we look at the Nordic countries, and we see that out of that entire set, the one male-run country is not very. Sweden is not faring so well right now.
Right. So, I mean, I just happen to be a strong believer that women's voices need to be heard more than they have been, but that we do have characteristics and abilities to communicate that they're far more sensitive. We're far more caring. We've had to be. And maybe it's just taken us this long. Maybe just it's the evolution and we're getting there. Because look, there's a whole generation of women that are now in their, mid 60s on up to 80, 85. And I know a lot of these women because some of them were mentors to me. And many of them never married and never had children. Why? Because if they had a career, they felt like they had to make a choice, one or the other. And now women don't feel like they have to make that choice. It's we can do it all. It doesn't mean we can have it all in the way we want it. It's not going to be perfect, but we can certainly do a whole lot more of it than we could have before. And so maybe that's just part of the evolutionary process. Is they paved that way, and now we're here in a place where we can take advantage of that and then pay it forward for the next generation.
It's so interesting. I want to also go back to in this moment in time where there's so much noise, right, in the sense of content, and for those companies who were engaging with clients face to face, or selling products and services that involved a human touch, there's been so much transition online, right? And so much noise now in this space. And there was noise before, but now it's insanely noisy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what you think about the work that you do with your clients in spaces where there's so much chatter already. And we all have Zoom fatigue to a certain extent too, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
only so much that we can really effectively absorb online. But what's important in your mind to stay fresh and relevant and current in how you communicate in your online spaces?
Well, first of all, I think you need to take some risks. I think you need to try new things. If you're not used to using video, figure out how to do it. Create your own content that's all about your message. Don't rely on the media to tell your story. Tell your own story. Don't be afraid to put ideas out there that are fresh and new, because in the past you might have thought to yourself, no, I don't want to do that. Well, now's the perfect time to try it. I also think that if you're going, another thing is, this is a great time to try something else. Maybe I am a huge believer in just having conversations with as many people as you can, because I've always done that in my broadcast work, because that's how I got stories, just talking to people. And now in my communications work, it's kind of the same thing. Somebody tells me one thing, and then it leads me to another place, and it takes me to another place, and another place, and another place. So it's really all about continuing that cycle of learning, consistently learning, and learning by talking, learning by watching, learning by listening, whatever it is. And so I think the more of that we can do in this time, the better off we'll be. It gets back to that notion of reinvention. It also gets back to the reset button. There's no time like the present to really just take a break from the things that you've been doing in one way. Why not try doing them another way? Maybe they'll be more successful. That old thing about, what was it, Thomas Edison said that you can, it was Einstein, that the thing about trying something 10,000 times and thinking you're getting a different result is, the core of idiocy, right? So take some time to think about how else you might sell something, or get a client, or do whatever it is your ultimate goal is.
It's interesting because we think about, the way in which this time has really constricted us, right? We're in our homes. We're not eating out. We're not going to museums. We're not going to shows. We're not socializing in the way that we did before. And it really does force us to step outside of our comfort zone, just in the sense of, the bravery that we muster up to go to the grocery store, or
my least favorite place in the world. I will do anything not to have to go there.
But it also creates, to your point, really incredible opportunities for us to think about how to do it all differently, mm-hmm. right? And how to meet different people, because that's a big part of it too. And I think for women, sometimes we have a tendency to let go of so much of our own identity. Mm-hmm. right? For many different reasons. Life gets in the way. We get really busy. We have to focus on our career, our family, whatever that is. And, for women also, we always encourage women to really think about the fact that they're the totality of all their parts, meaning that what you're doing now may not have been what you did 5 or 10 or 20 years ago, but it's really important to pay respect to your history and heritage, to what led you to who you are today, right? And we find that one of the ways that, we work with women is really to help them step into their story and step into their voice, to really own their power, and
Right.
to really understand that even though you may have left your corporate career, you may have left something behind professionally and personally for a reason, but still there's a reason why you had that experience.
Right, of course. So you need to build on those experiences. It's like they're building blocks. Every single thing that you've done is a building block that takes you to the next step, even if it was in your own head of failure. There's no failure. There's just an experience that will lead you to the next one. And if you haven't had a failure, then watch what's happening next, because everybody has one. So I think that as we look at all of our experience, again, getting back to that notion of literally writing a list of what is it you're good at when you try and figure out what you want to do next, because we just don't even recognize our own value. That's what makes me so mad at women sometimes, is that we don't recognize our own value. And we sit there and say, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And you're like, oh, please. You raise 3 kids. If you raise 3 kids, you can do anything. So I think and that again is another difference between men and women. We're not willing to take credit for who and what we are. And we share the credit. It's beautiful to share it, but sometimes we don't need to share it with everybody. I mean, the first thing out of a woman's mouth when somebody, gets her up on a stage and says, congratulations for, getting that $60 million account, blah, 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 blah. The first thing they do is, oh, I want to thank my team. I couldn't have done anything without them. But and I'm not suggesting you don't thank your team, because obviously you needed your team. But what I'm saying is you say, thank you. This was an effort. We thought about it. Here's the steps we went through. There's so many things that you can do that allow yourself to take some pride in what you've accomplished. And we should do more of that. There's a study I read once that said men take 30% more credit than they deserve, and women take 30% less. And the other thing, here's something else, that if there's a job opening, how many times have you heard a woman look at all the criteria and say, oh, I don't have that one thing there, so I'm not going to apply. A guy goes, I can do that. No big deal. Never done it before, but I can do it. We need to just say, take chances. It's okay. What's the worst they can do is say no.
I think that
yes.
I think that there are also more innovative ways that women can actually help each other in ways that feel like you're actually also moving the needle forward at the same time, right? So women are nurturers, whether or not we have children or not. And you're absolutely right. Women tend to give credit rather than take credit. But I also think that as women move into more senior level roles across industries, that there are also moments and times for us as leaders in key positions to really challenge the status quo of our own functional role too, and really think through, okay, so if the recruiting process in this example is flawed, what can I, as a chief administration officer or head of HR at whatever large Fortune 500 company, or even small innovative tech startups or anything in between, can do differently to ensure that I'm encouraging the right people to apply as well? Because I think that sometimes the systems are just so broken and so outdated that they're also not open or seemingly open to the outsider.
Right. No, getting creative is really important. And so, by the way, is sharing and connecting. I am a huge connector. I believe in I do things like I go on LinkedIn and I see some woman that has gotten some new position, and she might be my, I might have she might be, my first, what do you call it? Your first relationship on LinkedIn, but I may not know her very well. And the first thing I do is congratulations. What a great accomplishment. Love that new role. I mean, just to be encouraging. And I think the more that we can do that and to show pride in one another's abilities, women didn't used to be that way. Somebody else would get the job and we go, oh, please, I should have gotten that job. Instead of saying, you know what? Good for her. What can I do to help her? And I'm telling you, it's great karma. It just pays off in spades. And connecting people is so valuable because if you do that, you never know what's going to happen to you next. And I'm not saying I do it for my own selfish reasons. I do it because it's the right thing to do. And I think it'll make the world a better place.
I think also in this moment in time where so much of what we do is digital, from connecting at the human level, like LinkedIn is such a powerful tool to be able to reach out to people that we may think are our first degree connections on LinkedIn, but we have no idea who they are, right? And so that was the old way of networking. You go to an event, you add someone to your LinkedIn network, and you forget about them. Or you reach out to them because LinkedIn tells you that you may know something about them, or you may have common connections in common. And then you add them to your network and then nothing happens, right? But to actually take it a step further, and you'd be surprised, and this is probably your experience too, that the number of people who don't take that one little tiny extra step, which takes not even a second, right? But you're establishing an element of human connection.
It is so important. And it really, really, really has been interesting. I've done that a lot because I'll see somebody that's posted a great story or a great blog, or they've got some wonderful picture, and I'll say, "This is fabulous. Thanks for sharing this. And where'd you find this? Tell me more about it." And you just you get a conversation going, and it becomes really interesting. I also decided on day number 1 of COVID, when we were all so separated, that I was going to every single day reach out to 3 people I knew, and just 3, and just reach out, send a simple email or a text and say, "Hey, thinking about you. How you doing?" That's it. And it just keeps that connection going. And honestly, it makes people feel good. Because when they do that to me, I'm like, "Oh, thank you." So that you can't say enough for that. We are in a world that is increasingly connected and at the same time increasingly polarized. Mm-hmm. And so some people are isolated. They've been isolated through this. So if they know that you're just thinking about them, it makes them smile. And who doesn't want to smile? And smiling, by the way, is the greatest single thing you can do in this virtual stuff, because smiles warm up everything.
It's so true. And I love what you said around just reaching out to people and asking them how they're doing. And, I think that there's such heightened levels of stress and anxiety, which we had talked about earlier in our conversation as well. And it really just helps to allow us to take a moment in time to breathe, right? And to feel like we're still a part of something much larger than what's happening right now as well.
Exactly. So important to do all of that.
I want to touch upon a couple of questions dating back to your broadcast career. Mm-hmm. And you've interviewed and covered incredible stories of very pivotal moments and times in our history. What story or assignment or interview did you conduct that still leaves a lasting impression on you in your persona today?
Well, it was in, I think, 1984 or 89. I can't remember which year. But I was in Lower Manhattan at St. Luke's, right outside St. Luke's Church in a park. And I was interviewing Desmond Tutu, who was the apartheid leader in South Africa, and had fought so very hard for there to be unity and clarity and the lack of discrimination, etc. And as I'm interviewing him, and when you're a reporter and you're out doing these assignments, you're always like, "Oh, I've got to hurry," and blah, blah. And so his handlers interrupted the interview. And I'm like, "Oh, come on, I'm almost done." And they go, "Oh, no, you want us to interrupt him." And he just was notified that he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize. And tears are streaming down his face. And it was one of those moments where I've never forgotten it, because here's this man who had spent his whole life devoted to this, and now he's gotten this unbelievable recognition, and it was just truly a stunning moment, and I will never forget it. So that's one of my I would say one of the deepest moments that I had. There have been many others. There have been, of course, the coverage of 9/11 was really quite, was quite difficult, and it was amazing, and it was hard, and it was scary. So that was I'll never forget that as well. And then there were a lot of really wonderful stories. I went to Mongolia with the American Museum of Natural History for the show I had of my own called Jane's New York. And that show, so we're in the desert in Mongolia with rock star paleontologists from the Museum of Natural History. And so we're in the middle, imagine this, we're in the middle of the Gobi Desert, 700 miles from the capital, from Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia. And they brought in these giant trucks that have generators and freezers full of fish and steaks, and they brought their guitars and they brought some very fine wines. And so we're sitting in the desert where you can see forever, and the skies are the brightest things you've ever seen. And we're drinking fine wine. It's almost like singing Kumbaya and looking for dinosaur fossils.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So there have been a lot of very cool things. It's been, they're the experience of a lifetime for sure to cover all of the things that I've done.
What advice do you have for women that may want to completely transition their careers into a new field and use their voice in a different way to be more impactful, to be more present, to be more purposeful, but also to be leaders and mentors and advocates and allies for other people, maybe other women, but particularly through that lens of social justice, and want to actually create better in the world in this moment in time?
I would simply say, go for it. I really believe that if we sit back and ponder the risks, the cons, the pros, why should I do this, blah, 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 I think we then don't execute. And, somebody once told me just about everyone has $1 million idea. About 2% actually execute on it. So it's really just deciding to take that risk and to understand fully that you could fail and that you're really putting yourself out there. But what if you got to lose? You only got one life. And I just think it's worth it. So I would say, have a clear path, create a strategy, and then buckle your seatbelt and go for it.
And don't you think in this moment in time too that advice may not seem as daunting as what it was in the past world, right? Because we're all, like you and I are having this conversation today. For the most part, when we interact with other human beings now, we're literally, a Zoom box. That's our calling card now, right?
Right.
And many people really think that, conversations in the digital world are much more equalizing. Because in the same way that when LinkedIn first launched, that was a democratization of how people network, right? Because now the thinking was, I have access to the C-suite, even if I'm not in the C-suite, right? From that connection perspective. And do you feel like this might be a whole nother sort of transformation in the sense of how people connect and relate to each other?
I do. I really do. Because we're working in ways we've never worked before. We're making discoveries that are really unusual and different. We're realizing we don't need to have all those face-to-face business meetings. We realize that we don't need to be having all those meetings. We're realizing we don't need to work in that big skyscraper if we don't, on a daily basis. We're realizing we can survive in ways that we haven't before. So why not figure out different ways of doing things? We're going to be forced to anyway. We might as well just do it. And I do think I think some traditional jobs are going to be long gone, but in their stead, there will be new jobs. And we need to be open to that, because I don't think that there will never be the normal that we had before. I just don't think it will exist. And we have to figure out how are we going to live in that. And so I completely agree with you that we're going to see lots of people making changes, and probably very good changes for them.
And specifically, what advice do you have for women in media now, today?
Well, I talk to a lot of young women who are in it. It's a tough business. The thing that's different about it is there's so many different options. There's so many ways in which you can go. There's digital sites, there are broadcast sites, there are other kinds of media platforms. I mean, there's a million ways that you can be a journalist or a broadcaster today. I think one of the ways, the traditional route of being in television when I first started out was you would go from one station to a next station to a next station. I got lucky because I came to New York very early on when I was quite young. But a lot of people I worked with had made several stops along the way. But that doesn't happen anymore. You don't need to do that. And so what you do need to do is find your own niche. And you can get attention now because of social media by creating your own content and putting it on. And people will start to discover you. They'll say, that woman's very good. I like her style. I like the things she's saying. So there's so much you could do. Do you want to cook? Do you want to be a decorator? No, do you want to talk about decorating? Do you want to talk about landscaping, flowers? I have, a friend of mine that used to work for CNN now has her own daily digital media. It's a digital platform. It's about flower power, and it's about flowers. I'm like, well, that's really why. And she started to talk to me about why. I'm like, great idea. Why not? And maybe you want to talk about money. Maybe you want to talk about, there's every subject in the world, and people are looking for content. So I would find something you're passionate about, start to create some content of your own about it, then make sure it gets into the eyes using places on social media like LinkedIn, like Instagram, do Instagram Live. You can do all sorts of things. People will start to notice you if you're good at it, and the world may be yours.
I think the key really is finding your passion right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because given the fact that we're all not, human face-to-face, touch-to-touch, but really in those spaces and places where you can find something you're so incredibly passionate about, then that lends to your ability to sustain, right, whatever that business is, but then also to really get others enthused and interested in what you're doing as well.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Passion, passion, passion. Passion, empathy, vulnerability, take risks, do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. And thank you, everyone, for being with us today. I'm Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Jane Mayshad. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our upcoming content and check us out at joinmayshad.com to learn about how you too can become a member. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.